Hi, I'm Jodi Carlton, and I'm a neurodiverse relationship expert. A lot of people ask me, what is executive functioning? What does it mean? So today I'm going to explain what executive functioning is and how it actually affects neurodiverse couples when one or both partners struggles with some kind of executive function. So executive functioning is in the frontal lobes of the brain here, and it's like your control center that helps you manage task management, planning, organizing, time management, even emotional regulation, short-term memory. As you can imagine, individuals who struggle with certain types of executive functions are impacted pretty tremendously in their lives. And then relationships, not just partner relationships, but all kinds of friendships and parent-child relationships, coworker relationships, all of those relationships can be really impacted when someone struggles with executive dysfunction. Today, I'm going to talk about 8 different specific types of executive functions and how each one of these may impact a couple in a romantic partner type relationship. So the first one I'm going to talk about is planning and organizing. This is like a project manager in your brain that helps you determine goals, figure out the steps that you need to take to achieve them, set timelines, and then follow through and implement plans of action. When you're planning and organizing, you're figuring out what you need to do, how you need to do it, what you need to get it done, and in what order. Now, I also want to emphasize that everyone is really different in their skill sets, and not everyone who is neurodivergent will have all of these executive dysfunctions. Some people may be super skilled in one area and really struggle in another. The challenges that I'm going to describe today may not fit for everybody, but these are some of the most common types of difficulties that I see and that exist in the neurodiverse population. For example, some people may be pretty good at planning and organizing at work, but really struggle at home. A former intimate partner of mine was a project manager for his job. He managed multi-million-dollar projects for work, and he did that pretty successfully. But at home, he really struggled with budgeting and paying bills and family planning and vacation planning, selling or buying a home. It was a real struggle for him. And that was something that he outsourced to me, those executive functions, because I could handle those things pretty well, despite having ADHD of my own and struggling with other kinds of executive dysfunctions. Neither one of us at the time knew we were neurodivergent. We didn't know that he was autistic. We didn't know that I was ADHD. So this difference in our brains created a lot of frustration, a lot of conflict, a lot of misunderstanding, a lot of blame. And this is the exact kind of thing that I hear over and over again from my clients. Part of the difficulty is in the actual executive dysfunction itself, but in relationships, the other part of that difficulty is in the misunderstanding each other and not having a clear framework for understanding why these things are happening and how we're different from one another. The second executive function that I'm going to discuss is time management. Now, this one is a close cousin to planning and organizing because the two have to be used in connection with one another. But time management has to do with being able to estimate how much time a task is going to take, figure out when to start. For example, we need to know how long it's going to take us to get somewhere to arrive to an appointment on time. And we also need to be able to plan depending on what time of day it is because the traffic may be different. And our brain needs to be able to know all of this and coordinate it together in order to be timely. We may cram too many things in too little time. I struggle with this myself. I will invariably cram something more in at the last minute before leaving to go somewhere where I need to be. And I end up leaving 10 minutes late because I crammed too much in and didn't realize I didn't have enough time, which then makes me late. And I've had to learn how to recognize this in myself so that I don't cram too much in at the last minute because, as you can imagine, being late can really impact me in various ways. If I'm late for professional appointments with a doctor or some other person I'm meeting, that can be problematic and it's not respectful of their time. Something that used to be a problem in that same relationship that I mentioned previously I would be getting our kids ready to go to a sporting event, a soccer game or a baseball game. And my ex-husband would be meeting us there from work. And I would cram things in at the last minute. And then I would end up rushing out the door with the kids who were still too young to get themselves organized and ready to go. And most of the time I would get them there on time. Occasionally I would be late. But because I was not properly planning the time, we would rush out the door and forget things. So we would leave water bottles behind or cleats for baseball or a jersey, and he'd have on the wrong jersey because we were rushing. And my ex-husband, who was autistic, really thrived on that structure. Timeliness was very important to him. He needed things to be done in a structured kind of way like that. And it really bothered him for our kids to not have all their things. Rightfully so. He had a right to be upset about that. Again, we did not understand the way our different brains were working and why I was also, I was trying to cram so much in because I was also doing a lot of the executive functioning for the family. All of us are neurodivergent, and neurodivergent folks oftentimes outsource their executive functioning to others if someone else is better at a skill. And it's like all going on autopilot behind the scenes, not even conscious awareness. And it's something that my children and I talk about regularly now. They're young adults now, but sometimes they'll want to outsource something to me where I've got a skill that they don't. And we've all had to learn boundaries and saying, actually, no, that's yours to do. I can't do that for you. I had a tendency to take on the executive functioning. So I would be cramming in so much, trying to get it done, not estimating how much time I needed, and then run late. And then he would get irritated and criticize me or be passive aggressive at me, sometimes around the kids. And then I'd get mad about that and resentful. And it creates this dynamic of what I call the boxing ring, where people start getting really frustrated with each other. I see this kind of thing happening with clients, whether it's coordinating quality time together or vacation planning. People lose track of time of how long they've been working on a task. Maybe people work from home and they end up working well into the evening and missing a scheduled dinner time with the family. This difficulty in managing time can really show up in a lot of ways that cause conflict and frustration in a relationship. The third executive function for today is working memory. Some of you may have heard this referred to as short-term memory versus long-term memory, where we store memories from our childhood or for a long time ago, or, when we think back about a vacation, that type of thing. Working memory or short-term memory is more what our brain uses to hold temporarily. We need to hold that information temporarily, but it's not something we need to know for the long haul. And so it will discard that information after we've held it temporarily. So things like where we put our keys, where we put our glasses. How many of you have been looking for your glasses when they're on your head? I know I have. Also, things like upcoming appointments or meetings for the day or for the week, something you don't need to remember next month, but you need to remember it for now. When people struggle with short-term memory, even things like a phone number, looking at a website to call a business, I struggle with this type of short-term memory. I'll look at the phone number and go to dial it in my phone, and I literally have to look back at the website 3 or 4 times before I can get the whole phone number into my phone. And this is also because of other types of competing things that are going on in my brain. And as I've gotten older, that's become more and more difficult for me. Years ago when I was younger, I could hold phone numbers and commit them to long-term memory. But if you told me a string of numbers and said, hey, this is my phone number, I could retain that and put it in. Various things affect our executive function. Age and just the amount of stuff that your brain is having to deal with at any given time can affect all of these different executive functions. And I know for me, the more and more I've had on my plate in my life, like all the responsibilities I've had, the harder it's been for me to remember those short-term things. Another analogy for short-term or working memory is, I like to use computer examples. The long-term memory is more like the files that you store on your computer, whereas working memory is like the RAM, that random access memory. So it's like what allows the applications to be running. It runs those applications, holds things there temporarily, processes that need to be going while that application's open. But it's an analogy that a lot of people when I've shared that, it has really resonated with them. And if you think about that analogy of RAM on a computer, if you have too many applications going at once or too many things open on your phone at once, all of them can start to get glitchy. But that's true with executive functions too. If you've got so many things going on at once, wherever you do have some challenges, those things are going to get glitchy. Let's think about how short-term memory can affect a relationship. So let's say we'll talk about Ben and Maya as a fictional couple, and Maya is at work and Ben is at home, and he's trying to cook dinner, and he realizes he needs some ingredients from the store, and he says, "Hey, can you run by the store and grab some milk?" And she's like, "Yeah, sure." And then she's listened to her favorite podcast on her commute home, and poof, the memory that she's supposed to go get some stuff for dinner on the way home is gone. That's part of short-term memory. She doesn't need to remember that next month, next week, or even tomorrow. But then Ben is going to be upset when she gets home because she didn't remember to bring that home. A lot of us have that happen to us occasionally, but someone with executive dysfunction where short-term memory is an issue, this is going to be a common occurrence. It happens regularly. And so Ben might be able to forgive that pretty easily once off, but when he regularly asks Maya to do something, follow through with something, she commits to it, and then she doesn't follow through, it's not because she doesn't care, but Ben may interpret it that way. Ben may feel like you just don't care enough to even pay attention. You don't care enough about me. It can feel personal, especially if Ben and Maya don't know that she has ADHD or other types of neurodivergence that can contribute to this type of short-term working memory deficit. And so it leads to meaning about us, meaning about how much you care about me and love me. It's misinterpreted and can cause a lot of disconnect and confusion in a relationship. Additionally, I mentioned outsourcing before. When someone struggles with working memory, oftentimes they may outsource to other people regularly to say, "Hey, do you know where I left this?" Or, "Have you seen my shoes? Have you seen my glasses?" Or, "What time was that thing we were supposed to go to tonight?" It puts a burden of mental effort and cognitive work on other people who then are now having to try to pull up those memories for themselves or to help prompt the other person, give them that information. When one person is routinely outsourcing to another, the mental load balance can get imbalanced and cause conflict and distress in the relationship. Okay, so number 4 is self-monitoring, and this is tied into self-awareness, self-regulation. Self-monitoring is our ability to be aware of how we're doing at any given moment in time, how what we're doing, what we're saying is impacting others, is impacting the situation. But it's not only self-monitoring, but monitoring ourselves relative to others and relative to the situation. An example of self-monitoring is when I'm talking to another person, being aware of my volume or my tone, or being even aware of my facial expression and being aware of how that is impacting someone else. People with executive dysfunction sometimes struggle in terms of volume, may not realize that they're speaking much louder than they realize. So, for example, people in a public setting may be speaking at a volume that's pretty loud and carrying pretty far and intruding into other people's spaces and conversation. Sometimes people who struggle with self-monitoring may not realize how long they've been talking and have difficulty recognizing how long is appropriate or even noticing how other people are responding to them. Again, how am I performing in this situation? Do I need to start winding this down? And that's an interplay between being aware of myself and also noticing social cues, which in it is another skill altogether, but they work together. Self-monitoring also has to do with internal monitoring of sensations and, even things like, am I hungry? Have I eaten enough? That works together with sensory processing as well. But even just things like in relationships, how often have I told my partner I love them? If that's something that's important to them, have I checked in with my partner about dinner? Even being aware of, am I agitated about work and I'm actually taking it out on my partner? Because if self-monitoring is a difficulty and a partner says, "Hey, you're being kind of snippy with me," someone who struggles with that self-awareness may be like, "Nope, not. What are you talking about?" and just really not being aware that that truly is the way they're coming across. That can really cause major difficulties in a relationship, because if someone's not really self-aware and monitoring themselves in relation to their partner in their relationship, it can create a lot of hurt and a lot of confusion on both sides, because a partner who's on the receiving end of that may not understand some of what's coming at them. And then a partner who is struggling with self-monitoring may feel criticized and judged because of a lack of awareness of how they are coming across, how loud they are, what their facial expression is, how the things they're saying may or may not be applicable to the conversation that's happening at family dinner time. All of those things can drive a wedge if neurodivergence is not something that couples are aware of, if they don't know that executive functioning exists. And even if they do, it can still be hard to work around until some tools are developed to increase self-awareness. All of these executive functions, all of it is neurological hardwiring, but some of these things are not just set in stone. We can teach ourselves. It's almost like a muscle that we learn to exercise. Executive function coaches, or even someone who coaches like myself, can help you learn how to accommodate yourself and help even your partner, if they're the one struggling, to exercise and improve that muscle. All right, number 5 is emotional regulation. We all experience emotions to a varying degree. Some of us experience different kinds of emotions than others. Some of us experience a smaller range of emotions, and some of us experience a wider range of emotions. Then we also have varying levels of intensity. Some of us have real big, strong emotions, and others not so much. So really, there's kind of a range that is the most conducive to interacting with others, and also just for our own well-being, to keep our nervous system from becoming really activated and triggered, or underactivated and triggered. So there's kind of a range we want. Our brain usually helps us stay in range. Think of it as like a thermostat, an emotional thermostat that keeps a room around a certain temperature. Let's say a warm room may need to be cooled off, and so the thermostat kicks on to cool off the room. But if that thermostat is not quite working properly, so like the executive dysfunction, it may blast cold air into the room until it's way too cold and it's freezing in there. Then maybe at some point the thermostat finally realizes it's cold enough in here and it kicks back off, but it takes time for the room to warm back up. The flip side, maybe the room is not warm enough, and then the thermostat blasts the heat and it's just sweltering in there until the thermostat recognizes it's warm enough now. Then it finally kicks back off. Someone who struggles with emotional regulation oftentimes has these big, sudden, intense emotions, or emotions that are not clearly defined. So it's hard for that person to even be in touch with what they're actually feeling. And it's very hard to regulate. Those big emotions can be very, very intense and intimidating and overwhelming for partners and other family members. Then that can activate someone else's nervous system, a partner's nervous system. And that obviously can cause difficulty in a relationship when there's these big emotions that are overwhelming both partners and nobody really knows how to regulate that situation. Especially if anger is a big, intense emotion, it can feel very scary for a partner when someone can't, just is explosive with their anger, or also if they feel intense sadness or depressive type emotions that lead them to feeling hopeless about life and not being able to pull themselves out of that. And then on the flip side, when emotions are underwhelming and there's not enough emotion there for others to interpret what's going on, how someone feels. And that individual may not know either. That really can cause difficulty in communication and intimacy, in connecting with each other, understanding each other. It just opens the door for confusion and frustration and misinterpretations that can be really hard on a couple. All right, number 6 is cognitive flexibility, the ability to update our thinking, our perceptions with new information, new data. This is what's involved with task switching or spontaneity. When something new comes up or new information. We need to pivot, basically. People who struggle with cognitive flexibility are going to have a lot of difficulty transitioning from one thing to another, especially if it's a sudden transition. A memory that comes to mind for me is for my daughter who's autistic and struggles a lot with this type of cognitive flexibility. I remember when she was younger, we had planned to go to the park that day. And when it came time to go to the park, it was raining. She could visually see outside that it was raining. But when I said something about not being able to go to the park, she ended up having an emotional meltdown. Even though her brain had this new information that it's raining, she still couldn't cognitively switch to processing and understanding that we can't go to the park now. So it was just almost like this traffic jam in her brain, and it resulted in a meltdown. This type of thing also happens with adults in adult relationships. Let's say there are plans and someone gets sick, a child gets sick, and the plans can't happen. Even just transitioning from being focused on one task and then maybe getting interrupted by someone asking a question or someone being at the door or the phone ringing can really be difficult for somebody who has trouble with this cognitive flexibility, switching gears. Theory of mind is the ability to recognize what someone else is thinking or perceiving, or to recognize that they have a different perspective. Our cognition, our thoughts need to be flexible enough to hold space for what someone else may be thinking or perceiving that's different from us. Someone who struggles with cognitive flexibility is going to have a hard time with that and maybe not even realize that it's even a thing. I've had clients say to me, it really never occurred to me that my partner is actually looking at this from a totally different angle. I just kind of assumed we both had the same understanding, same basic information and knowledge about a topic. So we would come to the same conclusion. It just didn't even occur to me that my partner has all this other information or data, information that they're using to come to a conclusion or make a decision about something. It seems obvious. It seems obvious to some people, but it's really not when this is a form of executive dysfunction that someone struggles with. This can be really problematic. I've seen this happen a lot with clients who early on in their marriages or relationships, they want children. Both partners want children. And then when children come on the scene, there's a huge need for cognitive flexibility because children don't go by a schedule. They don't go by plans. Babies and children, they just don't. And so we have to have a lot of cognitive flexibility to be able to pivot and switch gears. Neurodivergent individuals who struggle with this will become very overwhelmed in a way that shuts them down, or they become avoidant. And then the other partner oftentimes has to take on a lot of the load, a lot of the mental load that then creates resentment and conflict and frustration. A lot of couples don't know how to resolve this because a neurodivergent partner says, I can't have another child. That's going to be too much for my brain. Then the other partner is really hurt and devastated because the plans they had agreed upon earlier were that they were going to have more than one child. And interestingly, the people who struggle the most also sometimes have trouble with cognitive flexibility because it was the plan. This is what we wanted. And even though that person may still really want this for them as a couple, that individual may be struggling to update their own narrative, their own understanding of what this is going to be like for us as a couple, this narrative that they're imagining of having multiple children, this family narrative, and they're failing to update that narrative to, it's not going to look like that. It's not going to be like what I'm imagining, having more children, because we now have this new information that my spouse is super overwhelmed by these sensory smells and the lack of routine and structure. So what I imagined as having 2 or 3 kids is definitely not the reality of what this is going to be. So if you have 2 people that struggle with updating that narrative and the cognitive flexibility, then that's a recipe for a lot of problems in the marriage or in the relationship. Okay, number 7 is task initiation. So this is the ability to actually get started. It's different from time management in that oftentimes people with this difficulty know what they want to do, what they need to do, why they need to do it, when they need to do it. but the ability to pull from their energy reserves and get started on whatever that is, even if getting started on it would result in a very positive outcome for themselves, there's this part of the brain that it's like a switch that won't flip on. For people who don't have this type of dysfunction, it sounds so bizarre, but people who do struggle with this, it's a very real and very difficult and devastating type of thing to struggle with, because it results in major procrastination and oftentimes things not getting accomplished that need to be done, whether that's paying the bills, which obviously if you don't pay the bills on time, that has far-reaching effects. Studying for a class or reaching out to a friend that you really want to develop a relationship with and a marriage, being able to initiate affection or intimacy or start dinner when you're the one responsible, or clean the house or do the laundry. This difficulty initiating tasks is just so problematic because you're sharing household responsibilities, but also just sharing the attention that needs to be put into maintaining the relationship, the things that need to be done to foster connection and foster intimacy. If a person struggles to do what they even know is needed and to follow through, if they struggle to get that switch to flip on when they need it to, it can really drive a wedge between partners and, again, cause a lot of hurt and frustration and guilt and shame, actually, from the person who's struggling with the initiation, resentment, criticism, judgment from the other partner. So this can be really devastating for romantic partners. So the last executive function I'm going to cover today is inhibition, managing impulsivity. We all have impulses and we all have impulsive thoughts that come to mind, ideas that we act on, and our brains sometimes are, especially with the ADHD type of brain, bouncing around thought, thinking about, I could do this, I could do that. So inhibition control helps us to manage all of those things coming into our thoughts and determine, prioritize quickly, almost in a moment's time, what to act on and what not to act on, but also not just in instantaneous moment, but even just impulsivity in terms of, I think I want to get a new car. I'm going to research it a bit. And you know what? I think I will just get a new car tomorrow. I'm going to go car shopping because I really want it. And I think it might be a good idea, without really investigating, looking at your own finances and what kind of car to get, and then acting on that impulse. So for me, I struggle with this one. I don't struggle in the way of making impulsive financial decisions. But as I go throughout my day, I will get so distracted by my thoughts and what I see. An example that just happened while I was recording this video, I had sent an email out to a garage door servicing company because my garage door doesn't want to work properly. It's too old. And they called me back while I was recording this video. So I had to pause the video. He told me he could come out tomorrow morning to look at my garage door. And he asked me to text him my address. As soon as I hung up, I went to my calendar to add it to my calendar, because if I didn't do it right then, I knew it would be gone because of my working memory difficulties. Then when I went to my calendar, which is on my computer right over here on this other monitor, my emails were also open, and I started to look at my emails, and then I had to stop myself. And this is how we can learn how to use tools and skills to tackle these executive dysfunctions. I know about myself that if I don't follow through right then, it may be gone. And so if I were to impulsively look at my emails that are coming in and not go text him right then, I might not ever do it because I was impulsively distracted by my email. So I have built in mechanisms to accommodate myself because of that impulsive brain. I have project management software that my team and I use to help keep me on task. And I also keep windows closed out that I'm not needing when I'm trying to work on a specific project. Otherwise, I will see it and I'll get off task and impulsively just go and do something else. So imagine how this is with relationships, though. When someone is impulsive in a way that can be detrimental to themselves or even to their partner. Impulsive decisions and choices. Financial impulsivity can be very devastating, but also impulsivity in terms of what we say out loud. We all have thoughts that come to mind that don't need to be spoken. And we see this real clearly in young children who don't know, how to control those impulses. When in a partner type of relationship, if we act on impulse, speak on impulse, I have clients where a partner has drained the bank account to go start a new business, or they impulsively accept plans for dinner, not thinking about the fact that there are already other plans made. There's just so many possibilities. And again, for couples, this executive function, along with all of these others, just provides so many opportunities for struggle. So let's shift into what to do. And I'm going to be brief about that in this particular video. But essentially, in summary, if either one of you struggles with considerable executive dysfunction, it's very important to get outside support. You want to learn how to support yourself, to support each other. You want to learn how to use resources, because there are resources. There are, like I mentioned, a software application. Some things you're not going to be able to train your brain to do. So if you have available resources that can provide external structure, external scaffolding to help your brain along, that's very important to do. Each of us have our own responsibility and accountability to ourselves to accommodate ourselves versus wanting a partner to accommodate us. We don't really have the right to outsource to a partner. A lot of neurodiverse relationships are codependent, which means there's someone who gives a lot and someone who takes a lot, not because they're a selfish person, but because they're very willing to outsource. And the person who is the giver is very willing to take on that load. The problem with this type of relationship, though, is that it becomes very imbalanced. One person is carrying way too much of the mental load. Then there's resentment there. So you want to have a therapist who's very familiar with neurodiversity and executive functioning. Not every therapist has been trained in these things. So you want to ask, do you have training? Do you know about these things? If you go to a therapist who doesn't, they're not going to be able to help you in a way that's truly helpful, and it can actually do a lot of harm. So make sure you ask. There are lots of resources online. If you even Google executive functioning resources, app software, you're going to find some things that can really help you to build supports in your daily life. I hope this has given you some clarity about what executive functioning is, how it shows up in your life, your personal life, your relationship, and some ideas for what to do about that. If you want more information, I have a few articles on my blog. You can visit my website, jodicarlton.com/blog. If reading is easier for you than watching a video or listening to the podcast version of this, if you want to work with me, then just reach out to us at gethelp@jodicarlton.com, or you can fill out the contact form on my website to inquire about setting up a consultation.